Welcome back on the Good Morning Artesia radio show. We were just kind of chit-chatting about the national news of the day, and not sure what the reaction is going to be to the raid down in Florida. I did read where some Democrats are saying, don't call it a raid.
Yeah, right.
That makes us look bad. Don't call it a raid. What else do you call what they did?
Right. Well, I mean, we're renaming a lot of things, right? We're not in a recession. We're in, I forget what they call that. We don't use the recession word anymore because it's a different word.
Yeah, yeah.
What is it? Yeah, you're right. I mean, is it a raid? No, it kind of looked like it to me. If you're coming into my house like that, I would call it a raid. But hey, if we don't like the word, let's just change it, make it feel better for everyone.
Feel better. And I feel bad, too, because there are a couple of video clips I saw last night on Gutfeld's show of our current president, and he's getting off the helicopter at the White House, and he can't get his sport coat on.
Right.
And he's really struggling. And look, we've all been there where we can't quite get that thing on, but none of us are the president of the United States, and
right.
that optics looked really bad there. And then they had the bill signing for the chip bill, which, unless there's something secret hidden in there, it's probably not a bad.
It looks like a pretty good bill.
And so Schumer turns around and shakes his hand, and then shakes the guy next to his hand, shakes Pelosi's hand, the other lady's hand, and Biden's still standing there like, well, are you going to shake my hand? That was the first hand that Schumer shook. was the president's hand.
Yeah.
And he's standing there, well, I guess he's not going to shake my hand. And
right.
I think the funniest clip I saw, though, was last fall. I think it was in September, and they were speaking at a school in the D.C. area. And Dr. Biden, Jill, was speaking, and there's a young kid and the president, and all of a sudden the president just turns and walks off. And somebody took that video clip and added the sound of an ice cream truck.
Yeah.
And Reuters had to fact check it and say that's not real. That's
right.
There was no ice cream music when the president walked off. Well, why did he walk off?
Right.
What was going on? In the middle of the speech. It's not like they were done, and then everybody's kind of walking off. So, I don't know. I really worry for what's going on in our country right now, and I hope we can get things
That's it. I mean, you
track.
look at it, and we can, it's funny. There's funny things that happen, but man, I sit there, I'm really sad. I mean, that's the leader of the free world. He's in charge. I don't want to see those things. I mean, he's not my party. He has nothing in common with me, I wouldn't think, at all politically, but you're still, and that's what we all said for Trump or Bush or Obama, or pick any of them, whether they're yours or not. They are supposedly leading the country right now, and why would we root for them to fail? Why do we? And that's what bothers me. And I think that's where we are in America. And that was a lot of the talk last night, is not just because of the raid on Trump's home, but is this how we're going to be now? If your party's in charge, are you going to go raid? Well, now we look like everyone else out there. And that's not what we are. And we shouldn't be proud of that. Everyone's excited, like, Republicans in, we're going to go after them all. Is that... if there's crimes, they should be prosecuted, and I 100% agree with that. But I think we have to be very careful. And as Republicans, I like to think that and I don't know any of y'all's affiliations. I'm a Republican. So as a Republican voter, I'm not looking for just that. I want somebody that can bring us back to where we were in the 80s, with Reagan, and not just because I think Reagan's the greatest president of all time. I'll just throw that in there. But because he could get things done.
Yeah.
Even if you go back to Bill worked, President Clinton, worked across the lines. And we got to get back to that kind of political.
Yeah. Clinton was a much better politician than Hillary is, or some of these others. He kind of knew, if I want to get reelected, if I want to stay popular, I'm going to have to get with Newt, and we're going to have to do some things.
Right.
And there were a lot of things that were crazy about the Clinton years, but there were a lot of things that weren't so bad about the Clinton years because of that. But we haven't been in that mode since Clinton left office, unfortunately.
Yeah. It's been, how do we get that other party? Because, okay, if all you're worried about is the other party, you're wrong. We should be worried about the citizens of America, and we forgot that.
Yeah.
And hopefully, I think, Byron and I were just talking about that out here. It's about the citizens, right? We serve Artesia citizens. That's what we're here for. We're not here to get a win for one group or the other group, or if it's a win, it should be a win for Artesia. And I wish more would think that way. I wish our state would start thinking that way. What's good for the whole state and not just our party, and then jump to the federal level. So
Yeah.
I don't know. We've got a lot of work to do, but who can bring that back to some sort of normalcy? Well, we'll see.
It's going to be hard.
It's a big task.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. So, well, let's talk city stuff, if you
Let's
don't mind.
do it. Yeah.
City Council met last night, and did you want to talk about that first, or introduce our guest first? Or
I'd love to introduce Byron. He does a great job, our infrastructure, and I thought, with school starting, there's lots of things going on. Obviously, we've got a lot of projects going on. One that we get talked about the most is 20th Street. So I thought, well, what a perfect time for Byron to come in and kind of help explain where we're going with some of these projects, how they're working, and why we're doing them. And I've never been an expert in very many things at all, so I thought, let's bring the experts, so it sounds like we know what we're talking about.
Well, and glad to see you, Byron, and glad you're here. And do you get to ever turn your phone off?
No, I think if I did, there would be probably a hanging out there.
I mean, if he doesn't answer his phone, do you and other counselors just go to his house and just, hey, you're not answering your phone?
Yeah. Thank goodness we've never.
That's why I answer the phone.
Yeah. Well, that's good, because it doesn't seem like there's many projects across the city of Artesia that come up that your name doesn't come up as being involved in this. Your title is Infrastructure Director?
That's correct, sir.
So what kind of falls under your supervision?
Right now, there's 7 departments underneath my purview. There's obviously streets and parks. There's the 3 utilities, water, wastewater, and solid waste. There's the garage and fleet. There's facility maintenance, which we take care of the buildings. We've got about 12 of them in the inventory. And then the cemetery is the other one that's under my hat, along with all the major capital projects we take care of through the infrastructure department.
And you've got supervisors that are in charge of each one of those individual departments. It's not like you're having to...
No, sir, I'd go literally insane if that happened, but I've got 7 very good supervisors who take very good care of their departments.
Great. So let's start at 20th and Grand. That's probably the most visible project that people are encountering right now. And kind of give us an update on how that project's going.
Right now, it's on schedule. We're still going to be in that intersection on schedule for 40 days. Now, they might finish a little early, but I wouldn't count on it at the moment. The intersection of 20th and Grand, we put it up first on the schedule because the way we were scheduling it at the beginning of the year, we'd hope that it'd get done by the end of summer. Unfortunately, COVID had a role in here, and the supply chain's kind of taken a hit on the chin. And so it took us 60 days just to get the pipe on order, much less delivered. And so there was no reason to start the intersection until the pipe came in. And so that's kind of where we're at. Right now, we were doing some sewer upgrades underneath in there. We're kind of getting ready to upgrade what I call an interceptor line that goes out to the west part of town. We've had a lot of growth in the West Acres, in the Stone Acres area, and we just got a main 8-inch sewer line carrying that, and at some point I'm going to have to upgrade that. So while I'm in these road sections like this, and we're completely building a road section, the commitment that the council has made is we go in there and we get everything done at once, so that you don't go back and you do the sewer line, and then a year or two later you come back and do the water line, and a year or two later you come back and do the road. And so it takes a little longer. This is the longest part. We're also reshaping the intersection just a little bit. There wasn't the geometric design of it won't change much. What I was working with is the grade. It's one of the flatter intersections I have in the community. It's matter of fact, it's so flat that when it rains and I get freezing weather coming up, that's the first place we go to see if the roads are starting to ice over, because it's that flat. We're able to make some minor improvements, but not a lot, because it's just so flat over there without going underground. Once you take storm drain underground, it gets expensive extremely fast. And so those are the pieces that's going in there. I've got an 18-inch main water line that comes from the Bulldog tank that's in there. It's what we call reinforced concrete pipe. It was a good product back in the 70s, but it's made out of concrete. It's got about a 1/4-inch steel insert in it, and it's got about 3 inches of concrete, extruded around it. And the net effect of it is it gets very brittle over time, and it'd be susceptible to vibrations, and you get some leaks. And for our community, that 18-inch is a major source for the eastern end of the city. And so every time I get into these big intersections, 26th Street, 13th Street, I get in there and I replace it with an HDP product. With a look in about 3 or 4 years, we'll go in there and replace the 18-inch in its entirety.
Wow. So that'll be another major project, Mayor, that we'll be talking about. So the 40 days, so when do you hope, if all things go as planned, that part would be completed, and then you would move on to the next phase?
It'd be then, the clock is on 40 days. And so I can't get too far in the means and methods of the contractor. All I can do is hold them accountable to the time and the specifications of the contract. So it's the hope at the end of the 40 days, barring any weather, which doesn't seem like we're being blessed with at the moment, they should be out of there on the clock. If not, then we'll have to charge them liquidated damage to go out of there.
So that day is, that anticipated date, that 40th date is when? The end of
40 days from now, I don't have.
Oh, 40 days from now.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I didn't know.
Apologies. Yeah.
No, I'm just looking for a date.
I know. I get it, and it's timing for the contract for me.
Right.
And then when we set the contract up, the liquidated damages are heaviest by the phases, because the idea is if you finish the phases on time, then the project completion is kind of a no-brainer at that point. So,
right.
So there's some pretty heavy liquidated damages at the end of each phase, and the intention there is to give them the space to do their work, but do it in the set time that we allotted.
Now, just to the south of that intersection on 20th, there was looked like a bunch of work back behind the apartment houses back there. What was all that part of?
There's some temporary accesses in there for those apartments. As we start to march down south, the next phase will be 90 days. It's a shorter phase. And as we start to march that away, there's a couple of those apartment complexes over there that doesn't have a lot of access. I think one of them only has one access to 20th Street. So what we did is we worked with some property owners and stuff like that to give them temporary access, so that we can shut down the area in front of their apartment complex and get that road replaced.
And then, so that's the second phase, or the next phase will be after this intersection?
Yes, sir. The second phase will go basically from Villa Drive down to West Man, and that'll be 90 days for that one. And then the third phase will go from West Man all the way down to Hermosa, and again, that's 82 days for that one. And the additive alternate, which is the tougher of the bunch, even with Grand, goes from Grand back to Main Street again. And then that one's slated for another 84 days.
Yeah, and that's going to be a very busy, because there's a lot of businesses. That's a major intersection and all that. Now 20th and Hermosa, is that where the big curve is?
Yes, sir, it is.
Is there any plans to do anything with that, or is that going to stay?
We've looked at it a bunch, and the problem is to straighten that out, you'll create a pretty bad offset intersection there with the other end of the street that goes south. And so it's still a little offset, but it's manageable as it is for competing traffic there. And so if you straighten that piece out without straightening its corresponding one on the south side, it'll be a pretty bad offset. And when you start doing things like that, it starts to create traffic conflicts, which then creates the fender benders.
Yeah, or more. Just slow down when you go through the S curve there instead of going real fast. You mentioned the work that's being done in the some of our drainage is above ground, and it gets really expensive if it goes underground. You've done the 13th Street project has been done, and there was a lot of adjustments and accommodations made with that. Now that that's been in place and you've had some time to see, we've had some storms, we've had some rain, has that all kind of worked out the way the engineers anticipated that it would work, or have you learned something from that you want to apply on 20th Street?
The thing that we learned there is you can't plan for all drainage. You just plan for what we call most drainage. In most cases, 13th Street is designed for what we call a 100-year storm, 24-hour storm. So the worst storm in the last 100 years, if it rained that amount of inches in 24 hours, it's designed to handle that. And for the most part, it has worked out. like we've wanted it to. We've had some pretty heavy storms in there. It's stayed passable. The outside lanes get a little crowded because it starts to carry heavy until it catches up. But the thing that you're looking for, yeah, it's impassable during the storm event, but it clears very quickly after the storm event.
Mm-hmm.
And so the intention with 13th Street, because now it's kind of your center backbone of the city, it's also one of the primary collectors for your emergency services to get back to the hospital, was to keep it as dry as long as we could, as long as we can afford it. And the example for that is the storm drain for North 13th Street, basically draw going north, by itself was $3 million.
Wow.
And basically, we put a triple barrel 60-inch in there, so it's a 5-foot pipe underneath there, 3 of them, that collects that water. But it's a big watershed there. You're basically drawing from 26th and Ritchie, and basically from 10th and Ritchie, and it's drawing all that to 13th Street, plus what comes out of Fletsy.
And so that's why you had to have those massive pipes to get that down into the
That's correct.
into the draw. And the draw itself, that serves a pretty important role if we ever do get any rain again.
Yeah, if you remember the big flood we have in 14 is about as heavy as I've seen that draw, and it was actually up to the curb line on Mahone and J.J. Clark in a lot of places, and it was a tough go for about 12 hours there, because we had about 6 inches of freeboard underneath the First Street Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that water started hitting that First Street Bridge, the bridge would have been okay, but it would started slowing your drainage down. And everything's coming to that, and you start slowing that down, and then it starts slowing your community drain, and that's when you start experiencing some pretty major flooding. Even in that event, I think we only had 3 houses that experienced flooding at that point, and they had some localized draining problem on their property.
So is that part of kind of the plan to keep an eye on all these different things and look at this and say, well, now that we know this, maybe we ought to work on something on the east side of the highway or some of these other projects that you're looking at?
Yeah, every project I do around road work is the first piece in it is drainage. And a lot of people say we're in a desert and we're flat, we don't have a problem. Well, we're a desert and we're flat, we got a problem. And we do get rain here. Typically, we get a big chunk of it in a 2-week period during the monsoons.
That's right. That's right.
Moving it along is important, and if you've seen it, there's been some things that changed in the community in the last 15, 20 years. You're starting to see retention ponds. As some of these bigger commercial structures come in, all the subdivisions have gotten their own retention ponds, like Stonegate, the apartment complexes and stuff like that are getting their retention pond. And as you add roofs and hard surfaces that don't soak ground, what I'm trying to do is what we do is we have to discharge at the pre-developed rate. So once they get all the roofs and roads in,
Mm-hmm.
they have to discharge that property at what it was before you did all that. And so it doesn't add to the system as a whole, because the community is invested heavily in the system as a whole, and you want to protect that capacity for as long as you can.
So that's why the retention ponds are then required to be built. So
Right.
they hold the water so that when it does feed into the system, it's at the rate previous to the construction.
And it's not adding to the problem downstream or
Yeah.
somebody else. And I had a couple of folks come in a few times from the community say, I don't like a retention pond. So it says, well, and then you tell me how many houses you want to flood, and I tell you how small they can be.
Well, and you're not doing it because you just like retention ponds, or we're trying to add a lake system to the Artesia here, but
Yeah.
there's a purpose for those facilities.
And yeah, and like you said, you're starting to see those show up, and that's what helps work the system as a whole together.
Yeah. Well, the draw itself, you have to go back quite a few years when the retention dam west of town was built, but that was such a major feature that helped allow growth in the western part of Artesia when that was originally built. I forget how many years ago.
It was in the late 60s, and it was part of what they called the urban renewal. And it was a result of the flood in 62. And there was a big flood that came through here and kind of wiped out quite a few homes. And it was a pretty big deal at the time.
Yeah.
And that spawned what they called the urban renewal, because where the draw is now used to be homes.
Right. And so, but then there's the dam that was built just west
Yes,
of
sir.
town. That's
That's
a part of that.
It's part of that structure.
Part of that, yeah. A friend of mine, we were going to put a bait shop right there, and we realized that's probably not a good idea.
Right.
There's not enough water out there to have fish to sell bait. So
Yeah.
And then when you do get it, you probably don't want to be in the shop. Right?
that's exactly right. So we have Infrastructure Director Byron Landfair is with us with Mayor John Henry. We need to take a break for news if that's okay, and we'll come back and talk more with Byron. And John, the mayor?
Sounds good.
Anybody ever call you the mayor, Byron?
No, sir. I'm just a lowly infrastructure director. I wouldn't take the job right now.
Good. So you hear that?
Yeah. Not sure what that means.
All right. We'll